Welcome back. Thanks again for joining us for another episode as we continue studying the Word of God together. We're glad you're with us. I hope the next couple of minutes will be a help to you. We are in the book of Daniel. We've been going through this as we do here, verse by verse, section by section, through different books of the Bible. And we are just about to jump into Daniel chapter 3, probably one of the more familiar chapters of the book of Daniel. Usually chapter 3, dealing with the fiery furnace, and then chapter 6, the lion's den, are two specific places, especially if you grew up in church. You're very familiar with these. You heard these stories in elementary, in children's church, and you've heard them preached. And so obviously we get into the second half of Daniel, 7 through 12, which deals with prophecy. Always not as famous, as well known as these. But we're going to evaluate chapter 3. We're going to dig and just kind of walk through it and look at some of the principles that we can pull from it and the time we have together. For time today, what we're going to do is we're going to let you go ahead on your own later to read the first 7 verses that talk about this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up and the command that everybody, all people in positions of authority, were there, and that when the music plays, they were to bow down. And we're going to see that 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, did not. One of the things that's been asked, and I've heard, in fact, I watched a movie years ago, television program years ago on it, and asked the question, where was Daniel at this time? And many would say that, well, actually the TV show, they had Daniel standing behind the king, trying to convince these 3 men to do this anyway. Like Daniel wasn't weak, and that Daniel all of a sudden was thinking that all this is wrong, and just go with it, no big deal, don't really get killed over this. I remember watching that program, very disappointed, because you go from Daniel 1 to Daniel 6, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that in Daniel 1 he wouldn't eat of the meat, and then Daniel 6 he would be willing to go to the lion's den, but somehow in the process he wouldn't stand with his friends. The greater point of view is that every leader was there and Daniel just wasn't there, probably traveling for the king or something like that. The fact is we have no proof he was there, and so we're just going to look at these 3 men today to look at the aspect of what was going on. Again, we'll start in verse number 8. Of Daniel 3, it says there, therefore, at the time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Now again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down. I hope you understand when they bowed down, it wasn't little. I mean, these people would prostrate themselves completely to the ground, which basically means if you were not standing, it was extremely obvious that you were not standing. And so everybody would have been able to see. This was not let me hide in the crowd. These 3 men, by doing nothing, by standing, just being willing to not move, made it very clear to everybody they were not going to do this. And of course, their point was that their God, Jehovah, said, you shall not have any other gods before me. You shall never bow before another one. So they're, again, enforcing or standing by their Jewish beliefs, their beliefs in Jehovah God, against the beliefs of the nations of which they're technically enslaved. So let's continue, go to verse 9. It says, they declared, these people who were mad at him, declared to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fire furnace. Can I suggest, before we go into verse 12, it is intriguing to me that one of the things we've often said here, the reason in the aspect of why God gives a free will and why there are options from the Garden of Eden all the way till today, options for us, is because you can't. It's not real worship if it's not a choice. Nebuchadnezzar didn't want worship. He wanted compliance. That's not worship. That's not submission. That's fear. And there's a huge difference. God says, I want you to do this by choice, and that is the major difference you're seeing here. Verse 12, it says this, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the prophets of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought, so they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you have already, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, bagpipes, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fire furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? So you see this conversation. He's angered. And obviously, I imagine he's angered. One, they didn't do it. How dare you? He's the king. Everybody does what the king says. Maybe they point out, these Jewish people you put in charge, look what they've done. And, there's all kind, maybe pride, all kinds of bits of anger going through the king. Doesn't matter. This king's going to make a decision, and these men know that by his word they will live or die. And they knew that when it started. They were warned about the fiery furnace. They knew what was coming. So none of this was any major surprise when you look at the story. Let's look at these men, the resolve of these men's response. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this manner. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image that you have set up. Now, the thing that's intriguing is Nebuchadnezzar ended his argument was, who is this God who will deliver you out of my hand? Remember, it's intriguing to me that it wasn't that long earlier that Daniel had clarified that he was in his position, Nebuchadnezzar was in his position because God put him there. Obviously, the king was more intrigued about getting information. He wasn't about to change his view of Jehovah God. Remember, those kings often saw themselves as gods, appointed by their gods. And so he says, there's no God more powerful than me, no powerful than my gods. What you're seeing is an opportunity. These three men saw as an opportunity to exalt Jehovah God. And so he says, listen, you got a choice, but these said, it doesn't matter. If our God, he's able. Our God is able to deliver us. And if he chooses to, great. If he chooses not to, we are still not going to worship your God. So if our end is to die in the fiery furnace, then that is our end. Just the reality. And please understand, a lot of times in looking at stories like this, right? We look at the story, we say, well, it's easy for these men to stand. They knew that what was going to happen. The end of the story. We look at these stories because we know the end. We know that these three guys did not die in the fiery furnace. We know that. So we look at this comment that they made back to the king, and we often look at it and say, it's not really that big of a deal. They knew this was happening, right? No, they did not. They were fully not aware. We have to look at these stories and remember that this was being lived in real time. These men had no idea the outcome that was going to come from this. And so let's continue as we dig through this. We're in verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it usually was heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fire furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fire furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now remember, some would state the fire was not really that hot. It wasn't as serious, and so they say that's why they lived. Any critics of this account? We just read the fact that these men who took these Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up to throw them in, the fire was so hot, they were killed as a result of this. Verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound in the burning fiery furnace. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace and declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of these heads was not singed, their cloaks had not harmed, and no smell of the fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and sent aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, and there was no other God who was able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So obviously he gets thrown in. What the king did not recognize at the time that we know is that the fourth person walking in the fire was Jesus. It was one of the pictures, theophanies, whatever term you see in the Old Testament, or Christophanies of Jesus present in the Old Testament. And he's walking with them. We know that they came out of the fire unbound, which means the fire was real enough. They went into it bound, came out unbound, which means the fire burnt the ropes. It was real enough to do this. But they were so protected that there was no smell, their clothes wasn't affected, their hair was not touched at all. And what the key is that you see not only king, the prefects and all the other governors, all the other rulers saw this. And there became a reality that these three men knew something, knew it had something, had a power, had some protection that they did not enjoy. You understand, they're worshiping gods. They're worshiping often man-made ideas, handmade idols, and that's what they're following. And I guarantee you there's been nowhere in their life that they could say anything like that ever happened to them. And now they watch this God they don't know, literally defy physics, literally defy what they'd never seen before. While they were a more superstitious age, this was real. And so now the king comes out, and of course his thing was anybody who worships anybody but Jehovah, God's going to be killed. Here they go again, worship, and it's being forced. It's no longer an option. And again, the difference between other types of worship and God is God's desire for our worship is to be voluntary, is to be chosen, is to be purposeful. You look at this though, one of the things you're going to see in stories like this, one, I find it intriguing, as I've often found in these stories, that these men willing to stand for right in the midst of a time that wanted nothing to do with Jehovah God, did not believe in Jehovah God. These men stood strong no matter what, and yet they were willing to honor God while still being advanced in their place, in their place of position in a pagan world. We can see today you do not have to compromise to follow God and stand strong and still be able to be influential in America. You don't have to be compromised for people to follow you. Really what they're looking for is someone willing to stand strong on their beliefs, lovingly but firmly and unashamedly on their belief. We've seen this in recent history, that will be followed, that will grab attention. Not that we're rude, not that we're mean, but firmly and boldly and unashamedly stand behind God. And what happened? Everyone else now got to see and realize the true God of the universe, Jehovah God. That also means that sometimes you're going to go through things like fiery furnaces. You're going to go through things that don't seem fair, you can't figure out. And it might be those things that God uses to let himself be seen in your life and let himself be seen through your life. The question is, are we willing to take the stand like these three men did? Like Daniel and these men did in chapter 1. Like Daniel, we'll see later, did in chapter 6. Are we willing to take those stands, to be unashamed, not self-righteous, not rude, but unashamed, and say, no matter what happens, we're going to stand for right. I hope that's something that be true for you, no matter what age you're in, that you say, I'm going to stand firmly, graciously, and lovingly, but unashamedly standing for God no matter what. Well, I greatly appreciate the time you give to me to be part of your day. I hope it's a help. Stick with us as we're going to jump into chapter 4 tomorrow, and we're going to continue to work through the book of Daniel and continue to learn what we can from God's Word. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next time.